Recently, a large experimental heat shield was inflated in space and landed in the ocean. Due to the scorching burns it endured, people thought it was a failure, but NASA deemed this explosion a huge success. Why is this inflatable heat shield a good thing, and could it possibly land humans on Mars? Stay tuned to find out. Last week, a polar satellite aimed to improve weather forecasting was launched. The satellite did not travel alone, though. It had a friend tagging along with it. An experimental heat shield that could potentially help land humans on Mars. The two missions were launched aboard a United Alliance V rocket from the Vandenberg Space Force Base in Lompoc, California. Even though the National Oceanic Organization and the Atmospheric Center have been launching weather satellites since 1960, the inflatable heat shield was an experiment they, along with NASA, were holding their breaths for. The shield's official experiment name was called a Low Earth Orbit Flight Test of an Inflatable Decelerator Technology. What a tongue twister. We'll just refer to it as Inflatable Shield. The inflatable shield hitched a ride to space on November 10. Shortly after separating from the polar weather satellite, the shield inflated and re-entered the Earth's atmosphere. Upon its re-entry, the shield faced temperatures that went up to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit and were going as fast as 18,000 miles per hour. That's fast and hot. How was this structure able to survive these extremities? This explosion was the ultimate test for the materials that were used in building the shield, which includes a woven ceramic fabric called silicon carbide. After the shield splashed down in the Pacific Ocean 2 hours after the launch, hundreds of miles off the coast of Hawaii, the team responsible for the machine retrieved its ejectable data and module. According to John Donano, the shield's chief engineer at NASA Langley, the aeroshell's exterior looked absolutely perfect when the recovery team lifted it out of the water. In fact, the inflatable structure appears to be in such good condition that it might be reused and flown again, although further testing needs to be implemented before a relaunch is confirmed. In case you're wondering what the ejectable module looks like, it resembles a large lemon, and what it does is it holds a backup copy of the data recorded during the flight. It's important to retrieve this giant lemon-looking object, as this is how scientists were able to work out the speeds it went to and the extreme temperatures it faced. The shield's team analyzed the recorded data and inspected the heat shield to see how well it performed in protecting the structure. If the heat shield works, the possibilities for space exploration would be endless. We might even get to reach the closest to the sun that anyone's ever been. You think Icarus could have used one of these? Preliminary data analysis helped the team figure out that the aeroshell was pretty effective at slowing down and surviving the steep dive from Earth's orbit to the ocean. That's pretty much the only resolution we can take from this. More discoveries and a full study of the shield's performance will take about a year to complete. Now, by breaking it down in layman's terms, let's look at why exactly these aeroshells are so important. Inflatable aeroshells that are heat-resistant are important because as a spacecraft enters an atmosphere, a lot of aerodynamic forces act upon it. An aerodynamic drag helps slow the spacecraft down and converts its kinetic energy into heat. Utilizing atmospheric drag is the most efficient method to slow down the spacecraft. With an inflatable heat shield, the shield becomes the brake pedal for the spacecraft as they drift into space. It allows the spacecraft to decelerate sooner at a higher altitude while making sure it experiences less intense heat. The idea of inflatable heat shields goes back half a century, but at the time there were no materials discovered that had the strength and the heat resistance. The idea came to Steve Hughes, one of the lead engineers for the inflatable shield launch, while he was reading a paper regarding Russian efforts on inflatable heat shields almost 2 decades ago. Hughes thought of the idea as a great one that could change up things big time around space exploration and began working on it. Like a wise man once said, all good ideas are stolen. Then after some efforts, a test was conducted 10 years ago. 10-foot wide inflatable shields were launched on suborbital rockets, going straight up and then coming down back to the Earth, but the materials were not strong enough to withstand the heat back then. The benefits of the inflatable parachute design can provide easy orbit return and lower the cost of access to space. This technology is also scalable to both crewed and even larger robotic missions to Mars. A lower cost of space travel means there will be more missions, and who knows, one day you'll be on a rocket ship taking a trip to Mars too. Well, spoiler alert, that can actually happen. Now we know what you might be thinking, and you're right. This device actually does resemble a giant inflatable bouncy castle from space. Inflated, it can be folded and packed neatly and tightly, just like you would a bouncy castle. Everyone wants in on the new cool thing. About a dozen companies have already expressed interest in this inflatable shield. A startup named Outpost Space is looking to create a novel space business that could use this technology. In the past few years, with all these new rocket companies popping up, the cost of sending satellites to space has been driven down by quite a number. especially thanks to SpaceX's reusable rocket technology. However, getting anything from space back to Earth is still a very limited and tricky domain. Outpost Space is aiming to launch its first orbital demonstration next year. It's going to be a platform that allows the payload to operate exposed to the space environment, returning after really short missions. This would allow researchers and companies to avoid their trips to the space station and will be opting for shorter trips to orbit. The Outpost team has already been in talks with NASA for the inflatable heat shields and has signed a contract to develop versions it can use. Now coming back to how this inflatable technology could help humans in getting to Mars. The mission's goal was to test the inflatable heat shield technology, which may one day allow for the landing of larger robotic missions on Venus or Saturn's moon Titan, or the return of massive payloads to Earth. The size of a rocket's shroud determines the aeroshells or heat shields currently in use. However, an inflatable aeroshell could avoid such a need and allow for the dispatch of heavier missions to many planets. Mars has an atmosphere that is less than 1% the density of Earth's atmosphere, which means extra assistance is needed to create a drag that would be essential to slow down and safely land a spacecraft. This is where everyone's favorite inflatable shield comes to the rescue. According to NASA experts, a sizable deployable aeroshell which inflates and is shielded by a pliable heat shield might apply the necessary brakes as it descends into the Martian atmosphere. In order to help the spaceship slow down more quickly and absorb the intense heating, the aeroshell is built to produce a higher drag in the upper atmosphere. Currently, NASA is able to land objects weighing up to 2,205 pounds, such as the Perseverance rover, on the Martian surface. But according to Joe Del Corso, project manager for the inflatable shield at NASA's Langley Research Center in Hampton, Virginia, a payload utilizing the inflatable heat shield may land on Mars weighing between 44,092 and 88,184 pounds. That's a huge jump for mankind. The mission was a great success and had a shared objective with the Artemis program, which intends to send people back to the moon and eventually land troops on Mars. In a span of just 6 days, NASA took 2 huge steps towards putting humans on Mars. They now have the capability to both launch and recover big payloads. These 2 accomplishments represent important milestones towards improving human access and exploration across space. For its crewed Mars plans, which call for the landing of large payloads like habitat modules on the Red Planet, NASA considers this approach to be promising. Such equipment might weigh around 20 tons, which is far too much weight for the present Mars entry, descent, and landing systems to manage. So now you know all about it. NASA sent an inflatable heat shield into space that came crashing down in the Pacific Ocean, but in a condition so pristine that this giant explosion is being deemed a win for humanity. This successful mission opens countless doors for space exploration, space business, and most importantly, getting humans to Mars. The only thing that's needed is more tests and a bigger version of the inflatable shield. However, the mission to Mars spacecraft is looking more promising than it ever has.